that way. The same would be again on currants. Same idea there as well. Like that's a fruiting currant, whether it's a fruiting or flowering. Again, it doesn't make a lot of difference. This is some of the older wood on the inside here. You can see that this is new growth coming from the base. This is new growth coming from the base here. Quite often what you'll want to do with your currants is just cut out the old growth like that. Encourage new growth to come from the bottom, because the new growth on a lot of plants is your most vigorous and most productive. And you just prune it back like this, and that's what you'd have. You got a plant that's going to shoot out lots of new growth. It's all new wood, and it's going to produce lots of fruit and lots of flowers for you. Rhodos and azaleas and any of your laurels are probably the easiest plants to prune. Even though this branch is bare, this is probably one of the worst looking plants. I found it sort of in our garbage pile. This is a rhodo, and it's a small leaf one, but whether it's a small leaf rhodo or a large one, it doesn't matter. This whole stem here doesn't have one branch, but there's buds all along this branch. There's buds all the way to the base. So wherever you prune these guys, you're going to encourage a lot of new growth. You're obviously going to sacrifice your flowers.
Oh yeah.
One of the things when you're renovating a plant is that we talked about when to prune. We're going to prune after they're done flowering. Generally is what we want, if we want to save the flowers. The thing is, if you're renovating your plant and you really want to encourage the growth of the plant, sometimes you want to sacrifice the flowers that year to encourage a nicer plant. So for rhodos that are really big, that you want to make a lot smaller or a lot bushier or bring them back in size, I would prune them really hard now. Skip the flowers, because the first push of growth you get in the spring is your most important. So if you let them flower and then prune them, you're going to miss sometimes that big first push. So basically, if I was going to prune them, and I was going to prune them at this time of year, this plant there's not a lot you can do. Like if you start pruning up here, and think, okay, I'm going to prune it here, and that'll make it bushier, it's still way too leggy in here. So you're going to get a whole bunch of growth coming in here. You're probably not going to get that much in there. Really, what you're going to do is just do that, and that's what you're going to end up with, just a stick. But out of that, you're going to break new growth all down low, and it's going to fill out and get really nice and full, and that's what you have to encourage. So if your rhoda is 8 feet tall, you just take your sawtooth and you cut it off at 1.5 feet, and it'll break nice and low and it'll be well branched. You're gonna have a year or two where you won't get flowers. It's going to put on a lot of growth because it wants to regenerate its size, because you've got a lot of roots there. You've got a lot of food down below that's going to push out. So you're going to sacrifice flowers for the first couple of years. But what you're going to get is you're going to get a lot nicer, bushier looking plant. And that's basically what you have to do. So with rhodos, azaleas, and near your laurels, you do not have to worry about where you prune them. They won't die. In fact, sometimes it's hard to kill them actually once they're established, really. That's kind of the issue. Here's another rhodo here. This one's in slightly better shape. But again, you don't have to be too fussy about these guys. Really, all we do with these ones here is you can see down in here, I don't know if that's obvious, but can you see the little buds here on these stems? See the little buds down there? The buds are all there. Because this plant is tall and leggy, no matter how we prune it, it's just like the last one, we're probably going to want to just prune it back to about 6 inches to 1 foot. So I'm just going to cut it back. You can use hedge trimmers, whatever you like. But we're going to prune it back like this. And then we're just going to take out any dead stuff. And sometimes you can just break that off easier. It just falls out by grabbing it there. That's sometimes a simpler way. But that's actually, to be honest with you, what you want to end up with. Because now it's going to break new growth kind of out of the whole inside of the plant here. And you're going to have a nice, perfect, round, bushy plant. So sometimes, like generally if they're in a lot of sun, it's not a big issue. They'll tend to stay pretty full. If they're in really heavy shade, they'll have a tendency to get leggy. You have to do this periodically. Where they grow a lot of rhododendrons commercially in the ground, obviously this is a fairly time-consuming way to keep them bushy. What they use is, does anybody know the old sickle mowers that they used to use for cutting hay years ago? Well, they just have those set at different heights. And they just go down the rows and they just flatten the tops of them. And then the rhodos come nice and bushy and full. And they just do that in the early spring on the younger crops, and they adjust the height for each year. And then once they're to a certain height, they don't prune them after that and let them bud up and sell them. But that's how it's done. You don't have to you know, you don't have to be really fussy with a lot of these guys to encourage a lot of nice growth. So when you're doing this and you're worried that you might be pruning the wrong way, or you might be doing it, you know, maybe inappropriately, remember that a lot of the way they're done commercially, a lot of the pruning done commercially is done fairly bluntly, to be honest. So, and we get pretty good results with it. So, you know, don't worry too much about how you prune it. Just, it's going to show you again on azaleas what we're trying to do. For the most part, what we're trying to do with an azalea is end up with one that's fairly low, fairly flat. Depends on the variety, they can be rounded up a little bit. What happens is sometimes these azaleas will start to go to one side or start to get a little bit leggy. What we do to encourage that is, again, kind of the same way we're pruning everything else, is you can do these guys when they're done flowering. You can do them now. You'll just sacrifice, obviously, the flowers. But we're just going to sort of round them up. And now when it grows, you're going to see more growth start to fill in on this side. You're going to get a nice round, basically a nice round ball of foliage. And then when it's in your yard and it flowers, it'll look a lot showier for you. Azaleas tend to get very straggly as well. Now when you have lots of them in your yard, it's a lot easier just to use hedge trimmers and then just round them up. You don't necessarily have to use pruners. Hedge trimmers work probably equally well. Other plants that really need this as well, that are flowering, does anybody have ceanothus or Victoria lilac? The little blue flowers in the summer. Escalonias, they probably got really burnt bad this winter from the cold. Again, you're going to want to go in and prune those guys back nice and hard and tighten them up as well. The thing with heather and lavenders is that they'll tend to, as they grow, if you never prune them, the growth goes out, or in the case of lavenders, goes up. But what happens is the center dies. They start to lose foliage on the base of the stem. So really, what we do with heather, or we do with lavenders, as soon as they're done flowering, we prune them hard. So basically, the simplest way for me to show you here is I'm just going to pick it up like this. And when you're doing them in your yard, you'll probably use a hedge trimmer. If we just do that to it, and then you tighten it out, you see like we've cut all the growth around here. It's all nice and neat now. And then on the inside here, it's going to push a lot of new foliage that's going to fill right out. And that's kind of what we're trying to achieve. And if you do that every year, you'll have the nicest looking heather. You cannot really miss a year. If you start skipping a year, it'll already start to thin out, and it's extremely difficult to fill it back in again. So heathers and lavenders are something that you definitely want to prune each year. Even things like Daphne, the rock Daphne, which is low flat growing Daphne, that's another one that you're going to want to do that way as well. Most anything that we call it donutting, any plant that tends to donut, which leaves you an empty center, you're going to want to prune each year as soon as they're done flowering. Okay, that's really all you have to do there.